If the subcommittee could please now come to order. Good morning. When it comes to the future of manufacturing in the United States, will this be a nation where help wanted signs hang on factory gates or closed for business signs? Today, our subcommittee will tackle a critically important subject: can American manufacturing thrive again? The future of our economy could well be at stake, and the chair now recognizes herself for an opening statement. Throughout our nation's long history, a growing and robust manufacturing sector has helped to make America great. It's been a driving force in our economy since the Industrial Revolution, as generations of hardworking Americans, armed with machines, tools, and a determined work ethic, cranked out everything from airplanes to toasters. But as our nation has moved from the atomic age to the space age to the information age, manufacturing has not kept up, losing nearly 6 million American jobs since the beginning of the 21st century. Aging, rusting, and abandoned factories litter the U.S. landscape. Today, we stand at an important crossroads. One direction, lined by job-killing regulatory hurdles, a punitive tax code, and indecisive political leadership, will lead ultimately to a further erosion of our manufacturing base and lost prosperity for future generations of Americans. The other direction, where smart policies and smart minds eventually intersect, could lead instead to a resurgence in U.S. manufacturing, putting millions of Americans back to work again and breathing new life into the beleaguered middle class. Secretary Bryson, as chairman of the subcommittee, I look forward to working closely with you on this very important issue. Let's make Made in America matter again. Let's throw the start switch right now, and let's get the widgets moving. Clearly, we don't have any time to waste. Statistics show the manufacturing sector was the hardest hit in terms of job losses during the Great Recession. While manufacturing accounts for just 1/10 of our nation's jobs, manufacturing suffered 1/3 of our nation's job losses. What's more, in 2009, for the first time ever, the number of unemployed Americans actually exceeded the numbers of Americans employed in the manufacturing sector, a fact that remains true today despite a slight uptick in recent hiring. So what happened? The U.S. was the undisputed leader in manufacturing for decades, with the world's largest manufacturing economy producing nearly 1/4 of all globally manufactured products. But that leadership is now in serious jeopardy, so it's vitally important to consider what is at stake for our nation. According to a report by the National Association of Manufacturers, American manufacturing supports nearly 1 in 6 U.S. jobs, which pay on average over $75,000 with benefits. Additionally, manufacturing jobs have the highest multiplier in the U.S. economy. Every dollar in direct spending produces $1.35 in additional indirect output. Conversely, every manufacturing job eliminated in America results in the loss of 2 other jobs elsewhere in the economy. So as policymakers, we are facing several critically important questions. First, what is the true state of the manufacturing sector today? Second, what factors are impeding a comeback? And finally, and most importantly, what policies could aid the manufacturing sector's recovery? Here's the good news. Historically, manufacturing is the hardest hit during a recession, but the quickest to recover due to pent-up demand for goods. Recent numbers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics provide a glimmer of hope that the U.S. manufacturing sector may indeed be rebounding. Last year, for the second consecutive year, American manufacturers actually added jobs. Prior to that, the manufacturing sector had suffered job losses every year since 1997. What's more, according to a recent report by the Boston Consulting Group, rising wages in China, the rising cost of energy and real estate in China, and the rising cost of transporting goods back to America for consumption are beginning to make the United States a much more attractive option once again for many manufacturers. But still, other observers see a real cause for concern buried within the recovery numbers. Overall, the U.S. lost 5.7 million manufacturing jobs since 2000, a rate of decline that exceeded even the Great Depression, according to a study by the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. Compounding this problem is a very sobering fact. The U.S. lost a staggering 66,000 manufacturing firms, an average of 17 per day, over the same period. At the current rate of recovery, ITIF estimates the manufacturing sector would not return to 2007 job levels until at least 2020. There are other factors contributing to this slow rate of recovery as well. In its 2009 report, Facts About Modern Manufacturing, The National Association of Manufacturers identifies external policy-rated costs such as a persistently high corporate tax rate, the high cost of health care, the rising cost of energy, regulatory costs, and tort costs as serious barriers to manufacturing. Simply put, there is a prevailing sense among many people that the U.S. is falling even further behind in fostering an environment conducive to job creation. So when it comes to U.S. manufacturing, is the glass half full, half empty, or will it remain shattered on the kitchen floor for millions of out-of-work Americans? Mr. Secretary, let's work together to sweep up the glass and then set the table for a manufacturing comeback. I continue to believe without a doubt in the greatness of America, and Made in America should continue to be a shared pride for all of us. And with that, I now recognize the ranking member of our subcommittee and want to, in advance, wish him a happy 65th birthday, which we will be celebrating next week. So, Mr. Butterfield, you're recognized for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Let me thank you, Chairman Bono Mack, and I especially thank you for those kind words and wishing me a good birthday next week. I've been looking forward to it for a long time, and it's finally come. But let me also thank the witnesses for their anticipated testimonies today. We know the schedule is kind of disjointed this morning, but thank you so much for your patience. Madam Chairman, there is no more important issue to working Americans than the ability to get and keep a job, provide for their families, and ensure that when their children grow up, they too can succeed. The causes of the most recent recession are many. They are indeed complex. While the solutions can also be complex, one thing is certain. The creation of jobs benefits the entire economy, and in recent monthly employment reports, we have begun to see the fruits of that labor. Over the past 2 years, the manufacturing sector has added more than 450,000 jobs. Not since the Clinton administration has the sector seen such fast growth. And in a one-year period from January of 2010 to January of 2011, immediately after the worst of the recession, the manufacturing sector added 47,000 machinery manufacturing jobs, 74,000 jobs in fabricated metal manufacturing, and 24,000 in computer and electronic manufacturing jobs. My state of North Carolina is the 5th largest manufacturing state in the country and the largest in the Southeast. The manufacturing sector provides about $80 billion to our GDP, or roughly 19.5% of the total. The nearly 11,000 manufacturing companies in North Carolina employ almost 15% of the total workforce, equating to well over 500,000 jobs that pay $65,000 annually on average. Many of these jobs are in advanced manufacturing and produce high-tech goods used in the defense industry. For example, Telephonics is a defense and homeland security contractor located in Elizabeth City. Telephonics designs and manufactures sensors and communications equipment and tests and integrates these systems into U.S. military and Department of Homeland Security aircraft. DSM, also located in my congressional district in Greenville, North Carolina, produces all of the revolutionary Dyneema fiber that is the key component in the new enhanced combat helmet, which will better protect our service members in the Marine Corps and Army without increasing the weight of their helmets. AAR, another corporation located in Goldsboro, North Carolina, designs and manufactures a wide range of machined and composite structures for aerospace and defense applications. There's also the North Carolina Biotechnology Center. This center was created out of necessity as traditional industries like textile and furniture manufacturing began to disappear. The center is the most experienced organization of its kind in the world and works to promote the cultivation and development of biotechnology applications throughout North Carolina, whether they are taking place for medical, agriculture, or energy purposes. And they join us today, and I'm excited to hear from them. I hope I can be here when we have the testimony of the witness. I'm going to have to leave shortly, but hopefully I can be around for his testimony. It is clear that American manufacturing is primed for a renaissance, and House Democrats' Make It in America agenda provides even greater opportunities for success through key policy initiatives. Several Make It in America initiatives have already become law, including bills that cut taxes and created loans for small businesses, sped up the patent process, lowered costs of raw materials, and helped to end tax loopholes so that companies are discouraged from shipping jobs overseas. In the 111th Congress, the House also passed Make It in America legislation to support American clean energy firms, invest in job training partnerships, and hold China accountable for the unfair currency manipulation that cost American jobs. When more products are made in America, more families, too, can make it in America. And so I look forward to the testimony today and thank each of the witnesses for being here and being so gracious with your time. I will submit my entire written statement for the record. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Butterfield. And now we have several members on our side who wish to make an opening statement in a total of 5 minutes. So I urge them to keep their remarks as brief as possible, and I will yield the 5 minutes to Mr. Stearns, who will then yield accordingly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is the third hearing we have had on this subcommittee on jobs, and it's, of course, a concern for all of us. And what we're also concerned about is a high tax rate in America. I think just simply lowering the corporate tax code and prioritizing the need for a skilled workforce would help. Other factors like the high cost of health care costs are going to impact this country, and rising energy prices. So we need to have a full energy program. And furthermore, we know that legitimate U.S. companies are losing jobs as they're forced to compete with offshore companies that steal American technologies. Having the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, use its narrow Section 5 authority to bring targeted cases against these offshore companies will simply demonstrate that access to U.S. markets will not be permitted to companies whose business model is based on theft. These are things we can all work together on to strengthen our economy, and I look forward to our hearing. And with that, I recognize Dr. Cassidy.
Thank you. Clearly, our problem in our economy right now is unemployment, and we know that that unemployment is disproportionately focused upon blue-collar workers. Those workers have traditionally been employed in mining, manufacturing, and construction. Now, I think we're all encouraged that the renaissance in mining and North American energy assets, fossil fuel in particular, have led to a renaissance in manufacturing, as recently discussed in the New York Times, CNN Money, and elsewhere. Now, this is fantastic, and if we take it as a moral imperative to increase blue-collar prosperity, then I almost see it as the primary variable. We should take it as the moral imperative to develop our domestic energy resources. My concern is that much of what has happened despite federal efforts, which have been actively inhibitory of bringing those domestically or those North American resources to the benefit of our blue-collar workers. So, Mr. Secretary, I thank you for being here. I look forward to the discussion and ask you specifically to address really what appears to be an hostility towards fossil fuels, which inevitably will raise input costs, which will inevitably put a damper on this renaissance in blue-collar employment and manufacturing. I now yield to Mr. Kinzinger.
Well, thank you, and thank you for coming in and joining us. I want to thank the administration for the enactment of the Colombia Free Trade Agreement, which I think was very important. I'm concerned, Mr. Secretary, with the state of our economy and the state of U.S. manufacturing as well. The March manufacturing output index slipped to 0.2% from 0.8%, which is a dangerous sign in my mind that our economy is slowing due to high cost of transportation. It's clear when I'm home in Illinois that what manufacturers are asking of the federal government, they want a fair and competitive tax code, they want less intrusion from federal agencies, and they want a sound supply of affordable energy. They simply want a level playing field to be able to compete with other countries overseas. I hope that you'll be able to discuss some of the work you're doing to make America competitive again. And with that, I guess I will yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and now we'll turn our attention to the panels. We have two panels of witnesses joining us today. Each of our witnesses has prepared an opening statement that will be placed into the record. Each of you will have 5 minutes to summarize that statement in your remarks. On our first panel, we have the Honorable John Bryson, Secretary for the United States Department of Commerce. Good morning, Secretary Bryson. It has always been a pleasure to work with you as a fellow Californian. We've had a long history together. I welcome you to our subcommittee, and I'm very thankful that you're here. We look forward to working with you closely on this and many other important issues. You will be recognized, as I said, for 5 minutes. To help you keep track of time, the timer is right in front of you. When it turns yellow, you'll have 1 minute to try to sum up if you could. Please remember to turn the microphone on and bring it close to your mouth so the audience at home can hear your remarks. And with us again, welcome, Mr. Secretary. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Working with you here on this. And Rank, can you hear?
Especially if you're complimenting the chairman, it's a good thing to have the microphone very close to your mouth.
Pull closer, pull the whole thing closer.
And
how's that?
much better, thank you.
All right. So I said thank you to the chairwoman, and now to the ranking member, Butterfield, and to all of you, the members of this subcommittee. We thank you for your support for the incredibly diverse array of manufacturers in your districts and throughout the United States. Today, I'm pleased to provide an overview of the administration's efforts to support manufacturing. After a decade in which we lost 6 million manufacturing jobs, as you know, and some of you touched on this, we are now seeing positive momentum in U.S. manufacturing. Over the past 25 months, our manufacturers have created nearly 500,000 jobs. So that is the best streak in the United States since 1995, and 120,000 of those came just in the last 3 months. Last week, I travel widely visiting manufacturers. Last week, I saw this firsthand in Tennessee. For example, I saw there a new, just constructed 1 million square foot Whirlpool facility. It's now the largest cooking product facility of its kind in the world. Extraordinary. And these examples are important because manufacturing jobs tend to be high-paying jobs with good benefits for middle-class working families. And manufacturing is truly key to America innovation and competitiveness. Manufacturing accounts for 70% of our private sector R&D, of 90% of our patents, and 60% of our total exports, including a record $1.3 trillion in goods exported last year. So today, I think we all agree we need to build on this momentum, and I heard it in your comments. After all, if we lose the ability to turn ideas, American ideas, into American products, if we lose that, our innovation chains would break, and we would lose our long-term capacity to compete and create jobs. As you have seen in my written testimony, we are focused on 4 key areas at the Commerce Department. I'll touch on these quickly. First, promoting innovation and protecting intellectual property. Second, establishing regional manufacturing partnerships. Third, promoting investment and trade. And fourth, providing information and analysis on the manufacturing sector. On a broader scale, the President has laid out a number of proposals to support U.S. manufacturing. For example, he has proposed that we reform our corporate tax code for the first time since the 1980s. This would lower the effective rate for U.S. manufacturers to 25%. Also, through the Commerce Department at NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, the new budget, the 2013 budget, requests $1 billion for a national network of manufacturing innovation. And this would help maximize the industry strengths in each of our U.S. regions. I'll comment on that later if you'd like to go into that. Overall, our focus at the Commerce Department is powerful and sharp. The way we express it is build it here and sell it everywhere. Manufacturing, build it here, sell it everywhere. I want to close by thanking you for continuing to support a vibrant and dynamic manufacturing base. Thank you for passing H.R. 4105, the bipartisan GPX legislation. This allows our manufacturers to challenge and seek relief from unfairly subsidized products entering our market. Efforts such as these will help strengthen our recovery, create more jobs, and ensure that American manufacturing continues to lead in the 21st century. Pleased now to take your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I will recognize myself for the first set of questions, and my question to you begins with, the Manufacturing Council was intended to be a strong voice advising the government of the private sector's views on issues that affect manufacturing. Yet that voice is not always heard by the regulatory agencies, most notably the EPA. What can you do to make sure that other federal agencies pay attention to the needs of American manufacturers?
Let me address the Manufacturing Council, then I'll touch on the EPA point if I could.
Sure.
So the U.S. Manufacturing Policy Council, which I chair across the entire federal government, is a big step to bring all the departments together so that we operate exactly with the same perspective, the same voice. We reduce redundancy. We work across federal departments, the Department of Defense, Department of Energy, and so on. So I think that is a way to reduce the bureaucracy, to be more productive, to be more efficient. With regard to the point about EPA and regulation, I can't address specifically the EPA issues, but if I could, I'll just touch generally on regulation. And that is, and I regret I don't know the specifics of the EPA regulation very well. But what the President has done, and what I strongly believe in, and I hear it all the time, and I work with manufacturers a lot, is we have to reduce regulation to the maximum extent we possibly can. And what the President has repeatedly said is we will allow regulation only to the extent it is essential to our economy, to growth in the economy, to national security, and to education. So those are the criteria. And as a consequence, for example, I think it's pretty widely known that the level of regulation and new regulation is less than the first 3 years of this administration and the comparable 3 years in the prior administration, but we have to keep working very hard on that.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. In the sake of time, because I know we have a time crunch, I'm going to cut my questioning short, recognizing that you and I spent a fair amount of time together yesterday, and you answered a whole host of my questions. So at this point, I'm going to yield back my time and recognize Mr. Butterfield for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, the steel industry is a major employer in my district, employing hundreds of hardworking men and women with solid jobs that they can support their families with. The industry is still recovering from the Great Recession, and increased imports of low-priced imports have hampered that recovery. Specifically, imports of hot-rolled steel from Russia have surged into the U.S. market, increasing by more than 50% between 2010 and 2011. There is a trade agreement covering these imports. And in fact, the Commerce Department and the U.S. International Trade Commission ruled last year that this remedy should stay in place to prevent injury to the industry. However, the remedy is no longer effective in preventing dumping. The pricing mechanism in the agreement is so outdated, it literally gives Russian producers a license to dump their steel in the U.S. My constituents brought this to the attention of the Commerce Department, and I understand that you may be currently negotiating with the Russian government to update the agreement so that it reflects current conditions and is effective in preventing dumping. Can you give me and my colleagues an update on those efforts? Can you assure me that you will hang tough and make sure the agreement is revised in a way that prevents further injury to the industry and workers? I appreciate you giving this matter the urgency that it deserves.
We have the responsibility in the Commerce Department to see to it the trade laws are respected, honored, and we prosecute many, many cases in which it appears there has been anti-dumping, countervailing duties that we needed to impose because subsidies and other means of undermining U.S. manufacturing were being hurt I don't know the Russia case. I will have to get back on that to you later.
Thank you. Please do that. That's a big deal
Yes.
to the steel industry.
And I understand that.
Mr. Secretary, we have heard all sorts of reasons for why there has been a long-term decline in manufacturing. We've heard that it's because of labor costs. We've heard it's because of currency manipulation. We've heard it's because other countries invest substantially more in that sector. The list goes on, but after reading the New York Times article, How the U.S. Lost Out on iPhone Work, I'm not sure these reasons accurately depict the role of overseas workers in the shift away from U.S. manufacturing. According to the article, one reason manufacturing plants locate in China is the ability to scale up and down so easily. In China, a manufacturer was able to hire 3,000 people overnight. And of course, it could fire them all 3 weeks later if necessary. It hired 8,700 industrial engineers in 15 days, which could take about 9 months in the U.S. Also, it was given access to a warehouse filled with glass samples, free of charge, and the engineers were made available at no cost and were staying at on-site dorms to be available 24 hours a day. Mr. Secretary, we know that we can compete on skill and ideas. Americans are hard workers. When we hear this talk about speed and flexibility, are we really talking about an overseas workforce conditioned to work 12 to 16-hour shifts and live in dorms next to the plant? Is that really what we have in mind?
Mr. Congressman, I think you raise an extremely important point. We have the responsibility at the Commerce Department to see to it that trade laws are honored. And we take many, many cases, and many cases relative to China, in which we go forth with that. So to give you a little background on what we do, and let me start with a special thanks to this Congress, GPX, that was an action that you took at the request of the President, and we were deeply involved as the Commerce Department, to see to it that the tens of thousands of American jobs in the 38 states that were being attacked by, we believe, unfairly subsidized imports and non-market economy countries. In non-market economy countries, China would be one of those. And you passed the legislation out at our request, and it puts us in this position. The several things we've done, plus now the protection of those steps. We have, as of February 2012, 283 anti-dumping and countervailing CVD orders in place, which puts tariffs on 120 products. So there is lots more to do. For example, in March, the administration recently filed a case on China's exports on rare earths. It's a violation, we believe, of the World Trade Organization rules. It is a policy designed by China to force manufacturing to relocate to China and to limit foreign competition. So we have to keep doing that. We do it with a very capable and large team of people, and these things are done under U.S. law and U.S. requirements.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Butterfield. And the chair now recognizes Mr. Stearns for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Mr. Secretary, I come from this a little perhaps differently than you. You talked in your opening statement about an energy plan. The energy plan that I think you and the administration supports is based upon using solar panels, wind panels, solar thermal devices and things like that. So it seems to me, if we're talking about where are the jobs, if we use our natural resources in this country, fracking of gas, oil and shale, burning clean coal, offshore drilling, ANWR, the Keystone Pipe, all those things would create a plethora of new jobs. And towards that end, I think that's where we come from a different perspective here. I read in a quote in the LA Times recently that you support the reauthorization of the Export-Import Bank. Is that true? And I think that's in your statement here that you're asking for Congress to continue to reauthorize it. That's true?
Yes,
yeah.
it is true, yes.
Now, one of the things I have with that is that when I looked at their annual report, they gave $10 million loan guarantee to Solyndra. And I chair the Oversight Investigation Committee on Solyndra, and I found, you know, that the due diligence of the Export-Import Bank was negligible, And of course, the Department of Energy did not do their due diligence, and they went bankrupt. And I guess the question is there any guarantee that the American people would have that the Export-Import Bank, when they go to companies like Solyndra and others that are involved with this idea of wind panels and solar panels and things like that, what confidence do we have that the Export-Import Bank will do the due diligence again?
So let me start within the Solyndra question you're raising.
No, it's not so much Solyndra. It's just that you're recommending the Export-Import Bank provide more money, and lots of it is going to these companies like Solyndra. So I think you should be aware that before you ask us to do this, there should be due diligence and caution the Export-Import Bank to be careful about giving out money without being sure that it's going to be worthwhile. Does that make sense?
The Export-Import Bank plays a very big role in exports.
No, I understand that, but the point is they gave Solyndra $10 million without due diligence. I just want to make sure it doesn't happen. Let me go on. Let me ask you another question. You've been chairman of the board of Bright Source Energy, is that correct?
I was for a time,
Yeah.
yes, about 9 months.
Now, that's another company that, this goes into my idea of developing jobs in this country could be done through our natural resources and not, feathering up a lot of these solar panels and solar thermal and wind turbines. For example, when you were CEO of that, didn't that get $1.6 million from the Department of Energy?
I'm sorry, when I was the CEO, I didn't get the last part of your question. I was the CEO
I was told
for
that the
18+
loan
years.
guarantee to the company that you were CEO was $1.6 billion rather, but I don't think you got all that. Do you remember how much of that you got?
I'm afraid I don't.
Okay, yeah, I understand. Do you remember anything about the loan guarantee that the Department of Energy gave the company that you were CEO, Bright Source? Do you remember that at all? Just yes or no.
I will check, but I don't believe my company had. You're talking about when I was the CEO of
a Bright Source. It says the Department of Energy.
Bright Source. So that.
Yes, when you were CEO of Bright Source.
I was ever the CEO of. That was after I had stepped down for Edison, Southern California Edison, the major electric utility in Southern California, and the parent company of which I was.
No, but at the time of your nomination to be Secretary of Commerce on May 31st, 2011, you were chairman of the board of Bright Source Energy.
Yes.
Isn't that correct?
That was that 9-month period. Yes.
Okay, so my question is, do you remember getting $1.6 billion from the Department of Energy when you were CEO? Do you remember that, yes or no? If you don't, I guess the real larger question is this idea of giving.
The answer is no.
Okay,
I don't.
You don't remember.
I don't.
So the real question is, we're giving money to a lot of companies that are being provided loan guarantees. They're going bankrupt. Abounds, Beacon. The list goes on. And yet we're talking about jobs. If we gave jobs to the natural people where the resources are, we'd have unemployment down where it is in South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana would be down to almost zero. And I guess when you're talking about Department of Energy giving $1.6 billion, that's a lot of money. And I'm sure you're aware in announcing this, when I look at these companies, the jobs they create are negligible. And I guess the question would be, when you as a CEO of a Bright Source Energy got all this money, how many jobs did you create?
I was never the CEO of Bright Source. I was never, ever.
You were chairman of the board, excuse me. You were chairman of the board, yeah.
Yes.
And chairman of the board, the question is, how many jobs were created by this $1.6 billion loan guarantee? And that's sort of what all of us are concerned about, because we're spending all these taxpayers' money. They're either going bankrupt, hanging on just by a thread, and yet we're not creating any jobs. So thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank the gentleman. The time has expired. The chair now recognizes Mr. Sarbanes for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here, Mr. Secretary. Obviously, very important issue for us, and I want to commend the administration and you and other cabinet level officials for the commitment, and I think much more coordinated commitment to reviving American manufacturing. I'm very focused on some of the special initiatives that have been undertaken at NIST. You referenced NIST in your comments, and in particular there's the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, which I know you're familiar with. Within that, in the last couple of years, there's been a special outreach effort called the Supplier Scouting Initiative. And I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, but basically the idea there is to work harder to find a match between these contracting opportunities with the federal government and domestic manufacturers and suppliers and vendors, so that we don't have as many instances where somebody's applying or asserting that a waiver should be granted from, say, a Buy American provision. Excuse me, because in fact, if you look a little harder and you get the word out and you're more affirmative in the outreach, you can in fact find American manufacturers and suppliers who can do the job. So you don't have to deploy these waivers and so forth, and obviously it's better in terms of creating jobs. I wondered if you could speak to the potential of that kind of outreach. I mean, it goes to the question of, you know, doing better with creating clearinghouses of information that can connect these opportunities in the federal government with the suppliers that are out there. And you can speak to the supplier scouting initiative if you have some knowledge of it, or you could speak more generally to these efforts that we need to make to connect the dots for people, and also if you have a sense of which agencies among the federal agencies are doing the best job. I've been impressed with the Department of Transportation's efforts, and Secretary LaHood has within a sort of discretionary authority to be more affirmative. He's really stepped up and done that, and maybe you have some impressions as well of that agency's work and some of the others across the federal platform that are trying to really reach out and bring in those American manufacturers.
I can give you an initial response. I am only slightly informed about the supplier scouting portion of this. That's new. It's done across several departments, as you're suggesting. Let me start with the Manufacturing Extension Partnership Centers. They are in all 50 states. I think what you're affirming is they've made an enormous difference in the development, particularly of small and medium-sized manufacturing businesses, because they work with those businesses, and they work, for example, in training programs that are in support of those businesses. And we increasingly strengthen our manufacturing base through this Manufacturing Extension Partnership. Once again, for manufacturing, we have this goal: make it here, sell it everywhere. And the scouting initiative, as I understand it, is one that has worked, as you're suggesting, and I don't know the Department of Transportation case, but has been valuable in working over other federal agencies and has potential value that we would like to move forward. But I will get back to you on, we have not done this yet to my knowledge. So I believe what's going on at NIST right now is further work on taking that kind of an initiative.
Well, I'm very supportive of it, and just we want to avoid looking back from the future and having vendors and subcontractors and other American manufacturers out there when they're told that an agency said, well, we couldn't find anyone who could fill this niche or do this job. And then you have a whole bunch of folks who would raise their hands and say, well, we were there, we could have done it. Yeah. But we didn't know, the effort wasn't made. And so I think there are things underway that will bridge that gap. The scouting initiative is certainly one of them. There are others, and I commend the agencies that are moving forward with it, and I yield back. Thank you, Madam.
Thank the gentleman.
I 100% firm. We want it done here in the U.S. We want it done at all levels right here in the U.S. I agree. Excuse me.
Thank you. And I'm going to recognize Mr. Harper for 5 minutes, but before you start, I just want to remind members that the Secretary has to be out of the door by 12:15 to catch a plane, and I know we're all sympathetic to that. So if you could be judicious with your time in hopes that we can get every member an opportunity to ask our questions. Mr. Harper, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. Now that I have 3 minutes, it appears, instead of 5, I'll try to move through this as quickly as I can. But thank you for your attendance today, and appreciate your time here. And, you know, I'm very fortunate in my district to have a very aggressive economic development university in my district, in Mississippi State University. They realized a long time ago that a major land-grant institution, you know, can serve as a strong catalyst for a lot of economic development, from generating spin-off advanced manufacturing companies from research, but also assisting in attracting major industry into the state by providing that cutting-edge research that's available. And it benefits not only the university and the state, but private industry as well. And you mentioned the Advanced Manufacturing Partnership, or AMP. Will universities like Mississippi State be able to play a role in that partnership, and will AMP expand on what Mississippi State and other universities are already doing?
Yes. The idea of this, what's called NNMI, this initiative, which is in our budget this year, one time out of NIST. And the idea of this is to really work hard on the advanced manufacturing of the future, of this year, next year, years beyond this, because we are the leader in the world in manufacturing, in advanced manufacturing particularly. We are the leader in manufacturing, but advanced manufacturing is where this sector, as you know from Mississippi State, is going.
Yes.
And so what we have to be very smart about is the very best advanced technologies for application in manufacturing. And the reality is technology is going to be a big part of this, and we have to work with these outstanding universities. So this NNMI initiative is to bring together just what you're describing, the outstanding universities working in this area, the outstanding private sector leaders that are working in this area, working in the labs with NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And the plan is to build as many as 15 of these around the United States regionally. In other words, the greater Mississippi area, the teams that you might work with there, would absolutely be a place where there'd be special strength that you would bring, and there are other places around the country. So the idea is to do this, and we want to move as fast as we can on this.
Mr. Secretary, we also are very proud to have in my district in Flowood, Mississippi, a Nucor steel plant. And they've you know, gone through a lot of difficult times. You know, when the demand for steel fell below 50%, they still didn't lay off a single worker. It's a great story there. While the market's gotten better, and you touched on this with Mr. Butterfield, and you know, a surge of imports of rebar from other countries are kind of stopping this recovery in its tracks. And so, you know, my understanding is there are certain countries, as we sort of touched on, that do not have maybe a natural economic advantage to produce steel, and some even import steel scrap from the United States in order to produce their steel products. It does seem that some of these governments in these countries may be subsidizing their steel industry. We just understand that you said, I believe, that it's imperative that the Department of Commerce look into that, and we certainly encourage you to do so. With that, I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank the gentleman. The chair recognizes Mr. Dingell for 5 minutes.
Madam Chairman, thank you, and I commend you for the hearing. I want to welcome my old friend, Secretary Bryson, here. Mr. Secretary, welcome. He has a distinguished record as a public servant and also as a very successful businessman who was interested in his community and produced great things. Welcome, and we're delighted you're with us.
Thank you.
It's clear to me that manufacturing and innovation are connected, and in order to equip future workers with technical skills, it's now more important that we work hard on this than ever. I have some questions I think would be useful in us understanding what the administration are doing. This will require yes or no. Mr. Secretary, is it correct that for every $1 of federal investment in MEP, American manufacturers generate approximately $30 in new sales growth, and that growth is shown to result in close to $4 billion in new sales annually.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr.
Mr.
Secretary.
Chairman,
Now, is it true that
You've worked on
MEP
this
helped?
for a long time, and I respect it enormously. Yes.
Well, I don't mean to hurry you in your
No,
response.
I don't feel hurried at all.
These questions are given with respect, but we have very little time, as you can observe. Mr. Secretary, is it true that MEP helped create 19,000 jobs and retain over 40,000 jobs in fiscal year 2010?
Yes.
And that was a year of depression, was it not, or recession?
Yes.
The administration has requested level funding for MEP in fiscal year 2013, about $128 million. Is that correct?
Yes.
So you're telling me that the $128 million in investment in this will yield close to $4 billion in new sales. Is that correct?
That's exactly right.
Seems like a good investment to me. Now, Mr. Secretary, I would simply like to observe that we ought to be quarreling up here whether we're going to put that much money in or whether we're going to put more, because it seems to be an investment that pays off and that a sensible businessman would like it very well. Do you agree with that statement?
I do agree.
Mr. Secretary, a lot of companies depend on very expensive software for advanced manufacturing, such as Ford, Chrysler, and GM in my district. The software is more often than not developed by American firms. American manufacturers purchase software legally, but I'm sure many companies overseas pay nothing for pirated software and use it without a license. That puts our people at a tremendous disadvantage. What can the administration do to level the playing field for honest manufacturers and lawfully purchase software and other information technology that they use? I think, Mr. Secretary, given our time problem, you should give me a brief answer, and then I should request that you submit further comments for purposes of the record. Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Secretary.
Yeah,
give me a response.
Answer,
we have a minute 59 seconds.
It is absolutely unfair that our intellectual property be taken from us without compensation and it be used elsewhere as if it was not originated here. So we need to stand strong against that, and I won't go further, but I can commit something. I'd like to tell you about the instances in which the Commerce Department in various ways has addressed that issue. I won't take that time right now.
Now, Mr. Secretary, we lose twice at this. Once our software people lose, and very significantly, and then our manufacturers pay higher prices than do the people that use or buy or acquire in other ways knockoff software. Is that right?
That's entirely right.
And that hurts us twice.
It does.
Mr. Secretary, it's a pleasure to see you here. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Secretary, I yield back a minute. With your help, I yield back a minute and 58 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Dingell. The chair recognizes Mr. Lance for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good morning to you, Mr. Secretary. It's my honor to meet you here today, sir. The innovative U.S. biopharmaceutical sector generates high-quality jobs and enormous economic output and exports for the economy of this country. As I understand it, nationwide, the total economic output from the biopharmaceutical sector's direct, indirect, and induced impacts was almost $1 trillion. And the sector supported a total of 4 million jobs in 2009, including 700,000 direct jobs. The district I serve in New Jersey is arguably the medicine chest of the United States. What is the administration doing, Mr. Secretary, to retain this country's global leadership position in biopharmaceutical R&D and manufacturing?
I know generally your district, and we are seeking to advance U.S. pharmaceuticals through the International Trade Administration in many, many ways, and perhaps you're aware of that.
I am, sir.
Work. We stand strong country after country after country with respect to those pharmaceuticals. And that may be the most important respect in which we work on these things. And I'm going to just take, it is a very large number of countries around the world in which our commercial foreign services officers are working on this, and I believe virtually daily. I, for example, have just come back from India. I've had a trade mission taking U.S. businesses to India about 2 weeks ago. There for a week, pharmaceuticals came up again and again, and we strongly support.
Well, I thank you. I look forward to working with you in the department in this area. Related to my last question, there is a trade agreement, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which the United States is currently negotiating with 8 countries in the Asia-Pacific region. Ensuring strong IP protections abroad for all U.S. industries will be critical to our economy and to American jobs. I strongly urge that the administration secure strong pharmaceutical IP provisions in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, including 12 years of data protection for biologics, so that all American manufacturers can benefit from these agreements. And I would invite you to comment on that, sir.
Yes, and I'd like to comment on that. Trans-Pacific Partnership is a high-grade form of free trade arrangement. So we have these agreements now, and what we need to do is bring them to greater specificity and expand them more broadly across the Pacific Rim, Southeast Asia, those countries. And this is, the President stands for this. I enormously stand for it, because what we have to have in these agreements is not the kind of agreements that have so many holes in them that, for example, are incredibly able. Pharmaceutical industry may be left out to some degree. We can't afford that. This is what we need to do with the talent we have in this country. So absolutely, I am supportive of that.
Thank you very much. I look forward to working with you on this and other issues. And Madam Chair, I yield back 1 minute, 13 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Lance. Mr. Rush, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Secretary, I commend you for your leadership and for the vision that you are bringing to the agency. You have the difficult task of advancing the President's manufacturing agenda at a time when U.S. corporations are facing global competition, at a time when American corporations are losing market share to growing export countries like China, Southeast Asia, and India. The policies you are currently implementing aim at ensuring the U.S. access to global markets and to enable manufacturers to reach 95% of consumers who live outside of our borders. I would add that our industries do not have, not only have to be competitive, but they have to also be one of the fastest in terms of market share gain, for would be able to reduce the current trade deficit. Obviously, we have to be innovative, proactive, and not overlook any market. And in light of this, I am curious to know which particular markets are you targeting in your investment strategy? In other words, which markets do you think is ripe to receive American products? And I have another question, and I'll ask these questions. Nowhere in your statement, and I might be wrong, have I seen reference to the African market, which according to many reports is the fastest growing region in the global economy. You are aware, I'm sure, of the Economist article that states that over the past 10 years, no fewer than 7 of the world's 10 fastest growing economies were in sub-Saharan Africa. And the only BRICS countries to make the list of the top 10 is China, which comes after Angola. And projections are that Nigeria, Ethiopia, Chad, Mozambique, Tanzania, Congo, Ghana, and Rwanda are projected to increase and take the lead, and that Africa's economy will grow at an average annual rate of 7% over the next 20 years, slightly faster than China's. Also, according to the economists and other reputable sources, the last Secretary of Commerce who visited Africa was Secretary Evans, who visited in 2012. And also I want to just add that if we double our exports to Africa, we can create up to 315,000 jobs domestically. So the question is, what regions are you targeting for your the export of the U.S. that your department is targeting, and how do you view about the market in Africa, and are you planning on visiting Africa in the near future to take a delegation to Africa?
Thank you very much, Congressman. On the question of targeting exports, we target all over the world, all over the world. With regard to, so for example, I'm just back, as I indicated, from India, took 16 U.S. businesses, outstanding businesses. I think it was fruitful. I think things will follow very positively. We already have some arrangements. With regard to sub-Saharan Africa, though I've personally been there, in this new role, I have not been there yet. I would like to talk with you a little further about the opportunities you see there. I have been meeting with senior-most leaders from sub-Saharan Africa to a degree. For example, I met with the, Prime Minister or President of Ghana when he was here. I've met senior officials from Nigeria when they were here. In my own business, I did quite a lot in South Africa. That was in my energy business. But I think you're right that deserves priority and focus, and I'd like to go further with it, and I'd like to talk to you about any ideas you have about how we might take that further.
Madam Chair, I yield back 5 seconds.
Thank you for your generosity. Chair recognizes Dr. Cassidy for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Secretary, I have a PricewaterhouseCoopers article which speaks about how the availability of shale gas has been just tremendous in terms of jump-starting manufacturing. For example, lower feedstock and energy costs could help U.S. manufacturers reduce natural gas expense by almost $12 billion annually through 2025. And that because of this, there may be 1 million more workers added by 2025 in manufacturing. Really tremendous. Now, my concern is if we take the old John Marshall maxim, the power to tax is the power to destroy, the President's insistence upon denying energy companies the same manufacturing tax incentives as other manufacturing companies, does that denial of a Section 199 for an energy company imperil or at least potentially harm the manufacturing renaissance we're enjoying because of the work these energy companies are doing?
Let me address the energy, and then I'll do what I can on the tax. I am not an expert. The tax is really done out of the U.S. Treasury, not the U.S. Commerce Department.
But it's so interrelated to the ability of a manufacturing company to do so. That's why I raised the point now.
And I've indicated what the President has set out for manufacturing companies. But let me also say to you, I absolutely agree that your point about the incredible value to the United States now of this natural gas find, so that we become more dependent on U.S. sources of all forms of energy, which is just the position we most want to be in. So it enhances our national security and reduces the risk.
I totally accept that. So
Yes.
With your business background, if you raise the cost of the company to produce that energy, which in turn increases the input cost for the manufacturing companies which depend upon that energy, won't you decrease the competitiveness, if you will, of our manufacturers vis-a-vis those in other countries? Our input costs are raised because of tax policy, whatever, imperiling our ability to compete. Doesn't that just make sense?
Yeah. Getting taxes right in our country for business is very important. I can't give you a response on the specifics that I just don't know in the case you're describing.
Now, next question, thank you. You said earlier, build it here and sell it everywhere. Would you accept that this should also apply to the export of natural gas-based products?
What I'm trying to puzzle through in my mind as you're asking this is, with regard to manufacturing, in every respect, I'm in favor of build it here and sell it everywhere. The case, if you'd take me deeper into the manufacturing component of what you're addressing, I will say if it is manufacturing, that's what I'm supporting, and we're working hard in every way. And I think you'd find, for example, that I've been very supportive, for example, with the U.S. oil companies in supporting their overseas positions. I'm very strongly supportive of that.
So some would argue that we should not export natural gas or natural gas refined products. You would accept, if we have an abundance of natural gas, you would accept that or its refined products could be exported?
I would, yes.
Okay, that's fine. I have plenty more questions, but I yield back for my colleagues.
I thank the gentleman and now recognize Mr. McKinley for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Chairwoman, Mr. Secretary, I've got a question. Back in Pittsburgh in 2008, the president was very aggressive. President Obama, then candidate Obama, was very aggressive in contending that China was manipulating its currency. Is China still manipulating its currency? Remember what he said they were. Are they still?
I believe that China is still manipulating its currency. I believe that
if that's the case, he went on to say in his remarks, Mr. Secretary, he said, if they are, then we're going to start shutting off access to our markets. What market have we shut off?
Say it to me again.
He said if they're going to continue manipulating their currency, we're going to start shutting off access to our markets. I'm curious, which markets, now 3 years in his administration, has he shut off?
Let me address what is within my area of responsibility. The Department of Treasury deals with the tax issues, deals with the currency issues. But what we are responsible for at the Department of Commerce is seeing to it that there's no violation of trade laws, and it's important in direct response to your question that anything that is done, for example, out of China or any other.
Okay, you're saying it's not in your department then?
What I'm saying is that's the reason that we have right now the very, very large number of orders that make it such that we impose heavy tariffs on goods that come from these countries is an offset to the fact that they're subsidizing unfairly under those laws. So that is
maybe we get back, if you could get back to us with a little bit more writing, I would appreciate that. If you could maybe explain, because we are short time on this, and I'd like to understand, you have acknowledged that they are manipulating their currency. The second is, you made an interesting remark that I appreciate.
Let me just say, if I could, we can refer that to the U.S. Department of Treasury. I'd be happy to refer it to them. That is where the judgment is reached about Treasury.
Okay. Well, yeah, the second issue that you made some interesting remark earlier about how they're reining in some of the regulatory effects, and you said as long as it doesn't have an impact on manufacturing and jobs, but yet we're already seeing that the using the Clean Air Act, the EPA has now caused up to approaching 40 gigawatts of power. Coal-fired generating plants have now indicated they're going to shut down. So would you not suggest that that probably is going to increase the cost of electricity to some manufacturers? When you have over 10% of our electric generating plants closing, isn't that likely to increase the cost of utilities?
You'll have to give me a little more on the specific case in point, but let me say, in general, what the President has stood for very strongly is limiting, reducing
I
the
hear
level
what he's
of
saying,
regulation.
what he stands for, but
And
it's what
so-
he's doing, and he's allowing to happen. That's why I'm just asking your question, do you recognize, or does the Congress recognize that decreasing electric generating facilities is likely to increase the cost of electricity? It's a yes or a no.
Let me address regulation, then I'll address utilities briefly if I could. The regulation is the only thing that is allowed in this administration with regard to regulation is things that bear strictly on health, safety, and security. That's it. That's all. So what, as perhaps you've seen in some EPA cases, for example, the President has not allowed those to go forward. With regard to what happens to utility power costs, new forms of generation are less expensive than old forms of generation in many cases.
Oh, if they're subsidized, I suppose I go along.
No,
Listen, I know indifference is not. The last is that comment that the congressman from New Jersey mentioned about the letter about Russia. This is a letter sent to you in February 17th. So for your staff to be able to find that, there was a letter directed to your attention on February 17th asking, so perhaps they need to communicate that to you.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, the chair recognizes Mr. Pompeo for 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Secretary.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us. I appreciate your enthusiasm for the growth of American manufacturing. The President, I represent South Central Kansas. It's the air capital of the world. The President has more times than we have minutes remaining in our day. Talked about corporate fat cat jet owners. We have one of the last great manufacturing jewels left in America that has not asked for a dime, doesn't want a grant, doesn't want a loan, doesn't want to be bothered. Would just like to have your supervisor, President of the United States, stop talking down this incredibly important industry. Can you walk me through how he thinks the customers for these union workers, these engineers that live in the heartland of America who are building these airplanes, how talking down that industry has anything to do with job creation in America?
So I'm sorry, just take me a little further. What industry are you talking about?
It's the general aviation industry. We have Cessna and Beechcraft and Learjet and Boeing and hundreds of suppliers that live in South Central Kansas and make their livings building these very airplanes that are sold to the folks that the President refers to as corporate fat cat jet owners. And it hurts the industry when he makes it politically incorrect to fly around in a business tool. And so I'm asking you what the job creation rationale for talking down the aviation industry could possibly be.
My experience, and I know this directly, I was for 18 and a half years a member of the Boeing Board of Directors. The President has been very, very supportive of U.S. aviation. And when I do the tours that I do around the world, I am again and again and again espousing U.S. aviation. Component parts,
Well, I
supply,
appreciate that.
That's what I do.
I appreciate that. It's an incredibly important industry. It's one of our largest export industries in America. It's incredibly important. He may be supportive of it, but the things he says when he speaks and his notion that we should increase user fees and that he wants to increase taxes on general aviation users are inconsistent with your statement that he is supportive of that. So anything you can do to help make sure that folks want to use these as business tools. They're very efficient. They're a great product, and we make them here in the United States of America. I want to turn to a second topic. You said you go out to a lot of manufacturers. I actually was a manufacturer for a few years before I came here. When you ask them the things that restrict their ability to create and grow jobs, and they list the top 3 or 4, do any of them talk about receiving federal grants as important to their desire to continue to grow jobs? Do they say, Mr. Secretary, the most important thing you could do for me would be to provide a federal grant to my business?
In the advanced manufacturing area, and principally, possibly exclusive of the advanced manufacturing area, yes, because the focus there is in a globally competitive world to retain the smarts, the very best technologies, the most outstanding means of retaining and enhancing our competitive position. and technology in the form of advanced manufacturing will be a significant part of that. And the role that the federal government plays by way of a stimulus and by the way the kind of work that is done at NIST, so right here in this area, the DC area, where we're doing, for example, this work on nanotechnology right now, and that is open in every case, invited. The only such thing, at least in the United States, the only thing I know, let's just say in the United States, where you, as a manufacturer focused on advanced manufacturing, can go and use the lab and bring in your best people, the universities that you work with, best people, and so on.
I appreciate that. But most of the grant programs, the Economic Development Administration as a good example, aren't providing for advanced manufacturing technology. These are grant programs that are going to old line industries. Do those folks talk about grants? What I hear from them is I hear about get the government out of my way, get regulation out of my way, and allow me to go grow my job and help me with trade so I can have access to markets. I don't hear them say, I mean, even the president said when he was campaigning, he said, we need to cut back waste at agencies like the Economic Development Administration. His words, September of 2008. I haven't seen that. I've seen continued efforts of this Commerce Department to try and pick winners and losers in the manufacturing space.
So, the federal government is involved in manufacturing in multiple ways. The Commerce Department is in multiple ways. The work of the Manufacturing Extension Partnership works with so many of these small and medium-sized manufacturers, and in the communities and in the community colleges and so on that work with them. So yes, there's federal government, that there are dollars associated with that. What we try to do is use those dollars really, really well. With regard to the Economic Development...
I'm sorry, my time, go ahead.
The Economic Development Administration, likewise, small agency, modest budget, very, very tight control over costs, and what it does, it is the only economic development administration across the entire federal government, and it does things, and we could provide you, I'd be pleased to provide you.
I'd welcome that, I appreciate it. Thank you. The Commerce Department has the opportunity to do so many good things. I just wish you'd spend less time trying to redistribute wealth and more time creating opportunities for everyone. So I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, do you have time for one more question from the last member? I know if it's a rather brief question, the last member has a quick question for you.
Okay, yes, we can do one more.
Your staff is indicating they'll drive
me,
quicker to the airport. So the chair recognizes Ms. Blackburn for her question.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And Mr. Secretary, you've been patient with us today, and we're appreciative of that. And I know that Congressman Dingell asked you a little bit about information technology. In my district in Tennessee, we've got a lot of performers as well as having a lot of small business manufacturers who purchase information technology in order to try to get a competitive edge. And then it turns around that they are competing with companies that in China or Russia or somewhere that have stolen that information technology. And what I want to know from you is, what can you do, and can the federal government do anything about the competitive harms that are caused by the theft of that information technology that drives the efficiencies, and also about other U.S. intellectual property that is stolen? And specifically, are you going to put any strong IP protections in trade agreements like the Trans-Pacific Partnership?
So the short answer is intellectual property that we do not get compensated for, that is taken in other countries, and there's no compensation and no recognition of where that initially came from, is flat out a loss to the people in our country who deserve the right to be compensated for what they provide, and with that, those people would only make better products rather than not getting the compensation they should have. So that is our responsibility at the Commerce Department, to see to it that those obligations are honored, and then when it's not done, that we file these many proceedings against them that I've described earlier, to see to it that is done, and that is a nonstop job at the Commerce Department.
Okay. And then are you going to insert stronger IP protections with trade agreements like the Trans-Pacific?
Yes.
Thank you. Yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. And Mr. Secretary, you've been very gracious with your time. We appreciate you being with us today. We all look forward to working with you in the future on the issues that we all care about so deeply. And together, let's just make printing help wanted signs a booming business in America. Again, thank you for your time. We wish you safe travels.
Could I put one thing on the record that I've just been asked to be sure that
Sure.
I've left some confusion possibly with regard to this question that I had about the manipulation of currency in China. And what I repeatedly answered is that that's the U.S. Treasury's role. But what I don't want to let not stand is that we believe that China absolutely must allow its currency to appreciate. That is critical. So, and thank you very much. I apologize for putting this last word in.
That's okay. We appreciate your clarification there. And again, safe travels to and from California, and thank you for your time. And at this point, we're going to take a very brief recess as we seat the second panel.
Thank you.
Yep.
Oh, we're still waiting for, is this our last witness? Yeah. All right, ready to begin with our second panel. Joining us today are Dr. Robert Atkinson, President of Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, Alfonso Lubrano, President of Materion Technical Materials Incorporated and Vice Chairman of National Association of Manufacturers, Small and Medium Manufacturers, Craig Giffey, Vice Chairman and U.S. Leader, Consumer and Industrial Products at Deloitte, and Dr. Kenneth Tyndall, Senior Vice President, Science and Business Development from the North Carolina Biotechnology Center. Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here with us today in front of our subcommittee. You'll each be recognized for 5 minutes. To keep track of time, please watch the timers in front of you. When it turns yellow, you have a minute to wrap up. And if you can, please make sure to turn your microphone on and bring it close to your mouth. The audience at home needs to hear you, and only they can if you're speaking clearly into the microphones. Dr. Atkinson, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be here. ITIF has been doing a fair amount of research on what's actually happened to the U.S. manufacturing economy, and we'll be releasing a report shortly on what do we need to do to fix it. As we've shown in our work, we lost a larger share of our manufacturing jobs in the last decade than we did in the Great Depression. The consensus among most economists is that this is a reflection of superior performance, that all of these jobs were lost due to high productivity. And our analysis suggests that's only partially true. Some of those jobs were due to high productivity. As companies get more efficient, they don't have to hire as many workers, which is good for the economy. But we argue that at least 2/3 of those jobs were lost due to the fact that U.S. companies were not able to be competitive in global marketplaces. And my testimony goes into more detail on that, but just one, I think, important point there. 13 of 19 manufacturing sectors actually are producing less today than they were in 2000 in real inflation-adjusted terms. This is unprecedented in American history. It's never happened before. Every decade before this, we've had expansion of manufacturing output. We argue that when measured properly, U.S. manufacturing output declined 11% in the last decade in inflation-adjusted terms. And one indicator of that is when you look at the amount of capital investment that manufacturers make. The Bureau of Economic Analysis measures this. They measure what's called capital stock, which is the amount of machines, the amount of computers, everything that manufacturers have. And in most decades, since 1940 to the present, capital stock is growing about 30% a decade, sometimes 50% a decade. In this last decade, it grew 1.2%. So we think there's a big challenge. We think that we have to respond to that challenge. And so what should Congress do? I think there are a number of areas that are important. Clearly, actually, let me just mention, I should say, there are certainly, I don't want to sound overly pessimistic, I think we have big challenges, but there are certainly some trends in the right direction. We heard earlier on the panel, on the hearing, about natural gas and the reduction of input costs to certain industries like chemicals. That's an important new benefit that the U.S. economy didn't have 5 to 10 years ago. Certainly some costs are going up in countries like China. Many companies now are taking a new look at offshoring using full cost calculus. So there's some good things happening, but I still think we can't just rely on that. We've got to get new policy changes. What are some of those? Let me just say 3 major ones. One is on the tax side. We have the dubious honor now, as of April 1st, to have the highest corporate tax rate in the world. And that's also close to on the effective rate. So we have a high statutory rate, but a lot of studies have shown we have a high effective rate as well. So we've got to do something on the corporate tax side that doesn't just rejigger the deductions and the incentives and leaves the effective rate the same. We've got to focus on reducing the effective rate, I would argue. But I would, as I've argued before, we also should do that in a way that keeps key incentives that are critical to manufacturers. One of those is makers or modified accelerate cost recovery system, which is essentially being able to write off equipment sooner than you would otherwise. That's a critical incentive. The R&D tax credit and Section 199 domestic production deduction. Those are all very critical tax incentives that help U.S. manufacturers become more competitive. I think one other area we need to focus on is, I would argue, we should be focusing on a new kind of regulatory review so that major regulations have to go through essentially a competitiveness screen. That if there are certainly needed regulations, but when you're focusing on impacts on sectors that are globally traded, we need to look at that more carefully, because those could have much bigger impacts than, say, on sectors that don't face global competition. Having said that, though, I think it's not enough just to focus on cost reduction. Cost reduction is important, but the Germans, their wages are 45% higher than ours. So we also have to get better, not just cheaper. One key area is trade. A number of people have talked about that. Our view is that there is rampant, what we would call innovation mercantilism going on in countries like China, Brazil, India, Russia. And we simply have to get a lot tougher. And that's not about being protectionist. That's about defending globalized trade. It's about defending the free trade system, which they are systemically violating. And I give the administration credit there, but I do think we need to do a lot more. Last point is technology. I don't think we can win this without doing all 3 things. We have to have the tax system, trade system. But I do argue we have to have a technology system, and I give the administration credit and others here who've supported things like the MEP program and this new national institute, NNMI, National Network of Manufacturing Institutes. Many of our major competitors have these kinds of industry-university cooperative partnerships that help develop advanced technology and get it out to companies. I think we could do a better job there as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Atkinson. Mr. Lebrano, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman Mack, and thank you to the members of the subcommittee and allowing me this opportunity to testify on behalf of the National Association of Manufacturers. I'd like to start off by saying this is an extremely exciting time for our country and for manufacturing. I am president of Materion Technical Materials in Lincoln, Rhode Island. We're a subsidiary of Materion Corporation, which is headquartered in Mayfield Heights, Ohio. We have offices throughout North America, Europe, and Asia, and we serve customers in more than 50 countries. Materion Technical Materials is the world's leading resource for engineered specialty strip products and offers a wide range of products and expertise in numerous markets, including automotive and consumer electronics. I have been leading the company since 1992. It is my privilege to serve on NAM's board of directors as vice chair of the small to medium-sized business group, manufacturing group, and on the board in general. I also serve as chairman of the Rhode Island Manufacturers Association and on ITAC 11 here in Washington. I'd just like to make a quick statement about what creates jobs, and a critical component for sustained economic recovery is job growth. With 95% of the potential consumers out of the United States, manufacturers everywhere have to compete globally. The way jobs are created is we go out and we have to compete for that global business. If we're competitive, we book the business. If we book the business, we have to make things. If we make things, we hire people. Very simple. Manufacturers have been proud to be leading the nation's economic recovery with increased productivity, renewed investment, employment, export, and innovation. As we've heard many times today, we're the top manufacturing economy in the world, accounting for 21% of global manufacturing. Nonetheless, we remain extremely concerned about the challenges facing us in the United States. It's 20% more expensive to manufacture product here. If you look at that 20% and add China's currency manipulation, we come out of the box at a 60%, in some cases, disadvantage, not to mention the trade barriers they're putting up. As president of a small business, I deal directly with these costs on a daily basis. I have an email on my laptop about a new opportunity in China. Their trade barriers are quite likely going to prevent me from getting that opportunity. It's for a small company called Apple. That's 2 to 5 jobs right there. I'm not going to be able to get potentially. So the situation on a global basis and the uncertainty really, really hurts our ability to create jobs. We created roughly 150,000 jobs in manufacturing in the last 4 months. If you look at the multiplier, which has been estimated to be anywhere from 2 to 4, you could be talking about 600,000 jobs. In order for us to continue to drive and create these jobs in this country, we need Congress to help us get more competitive. It's all about global competition. There are 4 goals the NAM has put together for economic growth. I would defer you to read those goals. I'm trying to move as quickly as I can to get through everything here. But the United States needs access to global markets to enable us to get and reach 95% of these consumers who live outside our borders. To do that, we need an effective tax policy, energy policy. We need to stop these insane regulations. And let me just make a quick point about the environment. I have children, I have grandchildren. I want them to breathe clean air. Over-regulating is going to hurt the global environment. How is that going to happen? We're driving business out of this country into other countries that are not as careful with the environment as we are. So in theory, over-regulation is going to backfire and hurt the global economy. Lowering the tax rate is important. The Ex-Im Bank is another important parameter that we need. We need FTAs. I want to make a quick statement about FTAs. The FTAs we have in place actually have trade surpluses. As a matter of fact, over the past 4 years where we have FTAs in place, we have a cumulative trade surplus of $120 billion. That equates directly to jobs. We need jobs for that sustained economy. I've talked about that early on. Workforce development. I have 3 technology jobs I can't fill right now. If you multiply that by all other kinds of small companies, we could be talking 600,000 to 1.5 million jobs unfilled because of workforce. I know I'm out of time. I just want to end with, this is a time of great optimism for manufacturing in the United States. We ask for your help. Help us get more competitive. Please, I'm begging you. We can do it. We can get those jobs back here. We can make this economy rock, but we need your help. We can't do it without your help.
Thank you, Mr. Bono. Mr. Giffey, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Bono Mack and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to testify this afternoon. The work of this committee and your leadership to help bolster U.S. manufacturing competitiveness is essential to this country and well appreciated. For the past several years, Deloitte has had the privilege of working in collaboration with the World Economic Forum, the U.S. Council on Competitiveness, and the Manufacturing Institute to better understand the capabilities necessary to drive superior manufacturing competitiveness. Deloitte and the Manufacturing Institute have conducted a national survey of the American public annually for the past 3 years. The results indicate that Americans remain steadfast in their commitment to creating a strong, healthy, globally competitive manufacturing sector in the United States. The most recent survey of Americans reveals that 85% believe that the manufacturing sector is very important to our standard of living. Ask how they would prefer to create 1,000 new jobs in their communities with any new business facility. Americans indicated that they wanted those jobs to be in the manufacturing sector more so than any other industry choice. As part of our work with the World Economic Forum on their Future of Manufacturing project, we uncovered compelling research from the Harvard Kennedy School and the MIT Media Lab, which indicates that the advancement of manufacturing capabilities is directly linked to a nation's economic prosperity, and importantly, to the prosperity of its middle class. This research also indicates that the capabilities of a nation's manufacturing sector is the best predictor of economic growth and prosperity for a nation over the long term. It shows that the more advanced the products are that a nation can make and trade, and the more advanced the manufacturing capabilities it possesses, the greater the prosperity. Finally, the research suggests that a great competition is underway between most nations for the benefits that their citizens can derive from a vibrant manufacturing sector. And this competition is showing an increasing emphasis on advanced manufacturing capabilities and products. In a parallel effort, in collaboration with the U.S. Council on Competitiveness, Deloitte conducts a survey of CEOs of manufacturing organizations around the world to gain their perspective on the drivers of competitiveness, as well as their view of the relative ranking of nations in terms of competitiveness. In addition, we conducted a series of one-on-one interviews on behalf of the Council with CEOs, labor union leaders, university presidents, and the directors of some of America's national laboratories over the past 18 months. Many of the leaders participating in those interviews described the critical relationship between manufacturing and innovation in an ecosystem that extends to include community colleges, universities, national laboratories, and the private and public sectors. And they refuted any notion that America can maintain its competitive advantage in research and scientific discovery over the long run without also maintaining strong capabilities in manufacturing. They must go hand in hand. Not surprisingly, all of these participants identified talent-driven innovation as the key driver of a country's competitiveness, while also noting the growing skills gap in America as one of the most concerning challenges affecting the U.S. According to a recent survey of U.S. manufacturers conducted by Deloitte and the Manufacturing Institute, 67% of executives reported moderate to severe shortages of qualified workers for open positions, translating into more than 600,000 available jobs that can't be filled today, simply because employers can't find workers with the skills they need. America's secret sauce for success must lie in a workforce where at all levels it is equipped with the science, technology, and math backgrounds necessary to compete with the very best, and the creativity and leadership to be solution pace setters for the world. A common theme across all of this research, the Council's Ignite series of recommendations to policymakers from U.S. business leaders, university presidents, national laboratory leaders, and labor union leaders, the input from the American public in our unwavering commitment report, or the perspectives on the future of manufacturing from our work with the World Economic Forum is that the U.S. needs a comprehensive competitiveness strategy for the 21st century. And we will need an effective public-private collaboration, resulting in the United States being consistently recognized as the leader in workforce talent, in innovation, energy availability and cost, and in business climate. Actions that facilitate that collaboration across all the stakeholders will enable the U.S. to drive high-value job creation and economic prosperity for generations to come. Thank you for this opportunity. I look forward to addressing your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Giffey. And Mr. Tyndall, 5 minutes is your time.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to share my experience at your hearing today. My answer to your question, can American manufacturing thrive again, is a strong yes. Let me explain. My organization, the North Carolina Biotechnology Center, was mentioned in Congressman Butterfield's opening remarks. We're a state-funded nonprofit that works to create an environment conducive to innovation, company creation, recruitment, and growth, resulting in biotech jobs. Critical to the biotechnology industry is biomanufacturing. These factories make some of our most advanced therapies, and the handling is specialized. Process technicians may have associate's or bachelor's degrees. Engineers develop new processes and maintain the plants, and virtually all of these facilities employ individuals with varying education levels from certificate to PhD. These are great jobs. Salaries begin around $30,000 for a high school graduate with some additional training and go on to top 6 figures. The average salary for all biotech jobs in North Carolina is more than $75,000, approximately twice that of our private sector. So how did North Carolina create these jobs? As biotechnology was being developed some 40 years ago, North Carolina's economy revolved around tobacco, textiles, and furniture, industries in decline. In 1984, the North Carolina Biotechnology Center was created to support biotechnology research, business, and education across the state for long-term economic development. North Carolina has taken a consistent and systematic approach to biotech job creation. We fund researchers to develop ideas with commercial application. We help spin ideas out of universities, and we work with partners, notably the North Carolina Community College System, public and private universities, and industry. Today, some 58,000 people work at about 500 North Carolina biotech companies. Of these, 18,000 to 20,000 work in manufacturing. In addition, the state's biomanufacturing companies showed modest growth since 2002 and are projecting 6.2% annual growth between 2011 and 2014. To meet the growing workforce demands, the state established a sector-specific training consortium in 2006. This partnership, called NC BioImpact, combines the resources of North Carolina's university and community college systems with industry expertise to form a unique academic, industry, and government collaborative. The practical impact is that multiple companies have located their biomanufacturing facilities in the state, at least in part because of the comprehensive training capabilities of the NC BioImpact partnership. Across the board, site managers from companies like Novartis, Merck, Biogen, IDEC, and others are able to fill almost every entry-level vacancy from within North Carolina. Finally, how does North Carolina's challenge from the early 1980s reflect the challenge in the United States faces today? First, we need a strong pipeline of products in order to increase manufacturing jobs. Second, training programs must produce workers who are job-ready day one. Third, we must recognize that other countries are beginning to affect our competitiveness in this sector. Increasing manufacturing jobs requires a culture of innovation. Quite simply, more ideas in the pipeline provide more chances for a product to be developed to a point of manufacture. Certainly, this concept holds true for biotech products, but also can be applied to many of the new knowledge-based industries that will require advanced manufacturing to develop and produce new products for their industries. Second, these biomanufacturing jobs require a different skill set than the assembly line jobs created at the turn of the previous century. In North Carolina, our training programs work to complement one another and stay in sync with industry needs. but success in these jobs also requires strong STEM education as early as possible. Third, the competition and pressures for this industry are global. In North Carolina, one biotech job yields 4.6 total jobs, according to the Battelle Institute. Everyone wants these high-impact jobs, and it's not just other U.S. states in competition for these jobs. Increasingly, all of our states are competing against a growing international contingent of biotechnology clusters. In summary, Madam Chairman, I believe manufacturing can thrive and continue to create jobs in the U.S. The infrastructure that supports these high-tech manufacturing centers lies in our education system and our capacity to innovate and develop new products, not just biotech products, but products from new and emerging high-tech industries as well. Strengthening math and science education, linking workforce training programs with industry, and consistently supporting innovation will continue to improve the environment necessary for the creation and manufacture of specialized biotechnology and other technology-based products here in the U.S. Thank you, Madam Chairman and committee members, for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Tyndall. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions, and I would like to start with Mr. Giffey, but I'm going to open this question up to anybody on the panel. I believe that the people who are most hardest hit by the economic downturn right now are women in the workforce. There's no question that they're being hit the hardest. But I've also met a bunch of women who are now in manufacturing, and they're very enthusiastic, and they're optimistic, and I understand that you've done a study on women in manufacturing, Mr. Giffey, and I was wondering if you could share some of your information or your thoughts specifically about women in manufacturing.
Well, women in manufacturing represent an incredible talent source that, unfortunately, American manufacturers have inadequately tapped into thus far. American manufacturers are pursuing the best talent in the world, and they are pressed to fill their job openings, they're pressed to fill their management ranks with outstanding talent. Unfortunately, today's education system, counseling approaches often result in women not pursuing careers in both science, technology, math, engineering degrees that are necessary, technical degrees that are necessary, and often opt out of a potential career in manufacturing much earlier in their life than would be necessary. This results in manufacturers, unfortunately, not getting access to that incredible talent and workforce. And I think more can be done, more will be done to both encourage women in our primary and secondary schools and our universities to pursue the careers that can lead to a very productive career in manufacturing and a contributions to this country. It would also help U.S. manufacturers solve one of their largest issues, which is getting enough talent into their organizations to drive their competitive capabilities.
Thank you. Does anybody else care to comment specifically on women in manufacturing? Mr. Legrano?
Yes, I would agree with that. I think the problem is not that there aren't women in manufacturing, especially high technology manufacturing. I think the problem is we can't find anybody with the backgrounds and technology expertise that we need. I think there would be absolutely no hesitation on hiring women if we could find qualified women to come into the company.
Thank you. It seems to me the manufacturers I have met, the women are entrepreneurial, and they are recognizing their opportunities there, and they're bringing their own great ideas into the sector. So if nobody else cares to comment on that, I'll move to Dr. Atkinson. You state that the country can restore its manufacturing competitiveness if we adopt the right set of policies in the tax, trade, talent, and technology arenas. Why do you believe the changes you suggest to these policies will restore our competitiveness? Have they been proven elsewhere?
Well, I think they have. If you look at the change in real manufacturing output as a share of GDP, the worst 4 countries in the world are United States, Spain, Italy, and Great Britain. Spain and Italy, we all know about having real serious problems now, and Great Britain has had, I think, very serious problems. There are lots of countries that are high-wage countries that have not lost manufacturing. Sweden, for example, Germany, a number of other countries that have actually been able to perform quite well. And many of those countries have taken all 4 of those steps. The overall tax rate in the non-U.S. OECD now is 10 percentage points lower than the United States. And These countries have put in place very high R&D tax credits. You look at a country like France, for example, where their research and development tax credit now is 6 times more generous than the U.S. credit. So they've put in place these kinds of incentives. A program that we are big fans of, or a country I should say, is Germany. They've really been able to get high value added, high tech manufacturing, compete against the Chinese, and there are a number of different reasons, but 2 of them, they have a great apprenticeship program. They take workers and they train them in partnership with colleges, community colleges, institutes, and companies. And the second is they have a wonderful system of what are called Fraunhofer Institutes. These are 59 centers that are co-funded 2/3 by industry and 1/3 by the government, located at or near universities that work with particularly middle-sized companies like the kind of company Mr. Lubrano was with. And those have had success as well. So I think when you look at all of those factors together, high-wage countries can be successful.
Thank you. Mr. Lubrano, you testify in support of trade agreements because we carry trade surpluses with the countries where we have trade agreements in place. Why do we have a trade surplus in manufactured goods with those countries?
Why do we?
Yes.
We would have those trade surpluses in areas where we're primarily technology-driven. Basically, what has kept our company surviving and competitive in places is the intellectual property we have and the technology we have. We are doing things today with materials, for example, the hard drive industry, that 2 or 3 years ago were considered impossible. We've gotten completely out of the box, broken the box, and are doing things with metals, plating technology, process technologies that 3 years ago people would say you can't do that, including a lot of products now for storage, lithium-ion hybrid batteries for automobiles, developed a new material system that's patented. So intellectual property, as you've heard before, is a huge driver that gets us to those surpluses.
Thank you. I agree with you on that point. And now my time has expired, so I recognize Mr. Sarbanes for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was looking at these reports. We got a bunch of these reports here from the U.S. Manufacturing Competitiveness Initiative. So there was one from CEOs. There's another one from labor. There's a third. And I was looking at some of the recommendations that were included. The one from the CEOs optimistically says that they conveyed an opinion overall that the U.S. had the resources, capabilities, and will to be the most competitive manufacturing nation in the world in the 21st century, given a new approach to setting public policy. And then what I found interesting is the first recommendation here, or the first principle, was from the CEOs, was policymakers should strive considerably less to create a single specific concrete industrial policy for the future of U.S. manufacturing, and instead seek to develop achievable goals, et cetera, et cetera. And then I was looking at the one from labor, and their first recommendation on developing a U.S. manufacturing strategy was to form a council on manufacturing policy to lead the development of a U.S. manufacturing strategy through constructive dialogue between management, labor, educators, and policymakers, and so forth. So I wondered if anyone who wants to could just comment on whether there's tension there in terms of whether we should really set a focused strategy and policy on U.S. manufacturing and have real structure to that over time. Or whether we should, as this other report said, strive considerably less to create a single specific concrete industrial policy for the future of U.S. manufacturing. We could go down the line if you want, Mr. Atkins.
I think it's very dangerous to have a policy here without a real coherent strategy. And the word industrial policy has largely been given a bad name. Whatever you want to call it, if we don't have a coherent strategy, and we can't just rely on sort of expecting companies to do the right thing, just leaving them alone. One important reason, by the way, there's a skill shortage right now that everybody talks about, and companies complain about a skill shortage, is because companies themselves are investing half in training their workers than they did a decade ago. Investing half. So when you're investing half in training your workers, you're going to end up with a skills shortage. So I don't think that I think the real challenge here is we need to form real public-private partnerships and form a national industrial strategy. And that will clearly include things, if you will, from both sides of the aisle. It has to include regulatory issues, has to include tax issues, but it has to include real strategy about technology areas that we think we can be successful in, about how we're going to reorganize our workforce system and other things like that.
I don't think what you mentioned, any of those things are mutually exclusive. I think the game has changed. And what's needed is a partnership, if you will, between government, labor, and manufacturing and the management of the manufacturing companies. 2009 was probably the toughest year of my career. And I've been doing this for about 40 years now. You're supposed to say I don't look it, but in any case, the cooperation with our labor force, our ability to move people around, the understanding from all sides about how important it was that we get through this thing together, and the government help. I'll give you an example. Rhode Island has a work-share program. So it took all the resources we had and all the cooperation we could get, government, management, employees, to get through that period, and we did. A lot of companies didn't. But I think that's the kind of thing we're looking for going forward. So I don't see any of those things you mentioned in that report as mutually exclusive.
Congressman, I was actually fortunate enough to do all of those interviews and benefited from being able to have those conversations with those CEOs, those labor leaders, university presidents, and lab leaders. I think they very much believe that the United States needs to come up with a comprehensive strategy. Collectively, I think they believe that industrial policy, because it has a fairly bad reputation, and the notion of picking winners and losers on a regular basis through government policy actions is not something that they believe makes sense. But creating a broad strategy that has tenets under it that allow American businesses to be most competitive on the global stage and creates a business climate that creates jobs, they were very much in agreement on.
Maybe we can come back on a second.
All right. The chair now recognizes Ms. Blackburn for her questions.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you to each of you. As you can hear the bells, we've got votes, so we're going to do this quickly. I'm just going to give each of you a question that I would like to hear from you on. You can submit it in writing because I know Mr. Cassidy, we want to get his questions in before we leave. But we've talked about competitiveness. We've talked about information technology, and Mr. Lebrano, you just touched on that a little bit also. And what I would like to know is from each of you is, number one, when you look at that bottom line, and as you said, you've had some tough years, and we're learning to do things differently in our U.S. manufacturing base. When you look at your efficiencies, what percentage of your product, of your profit, are you attributing to the use of new information technologies? And then secondly, as we look at spectrum, and of course we're trying to get more spectrum auctioned so that you can use more of these technologies, how important is it to you to have more spectrum available for use of these new technologies in the marketplace? And I will yield back my time so that Mr. Cassidy can answer and you all can respond to me in writing. But thank you again for your participation with us.
Thank you. To clarify, the gentlelady's only asking for responses in writing. Okay, so I'll recognize Dr. Cassidy now for his 5 minutes, and again recognize we are crunched for time.
Y'all give me the hook when we got to get there, okay? I mean, I'm used to women telling me what to do, so whoever feels most qualified. I'm struck again, as you heard my previous questioning, how natural gas and domestic oil and gas has from everything I read, contributed greatly to lowering input cost and otherwise improving the robustness of our manufacturing. If you will, directly contributing to tens of thousands of manufacturing jobs. Now, the President almost demagogues the issue, I hate to say that, because he continues to suggest that we can replace that sort of energy with what he calls renewables and not have a downside. Now, let me just give some statistics that we pulled up from the Energy Institute, that the federal electric subsidies per unit of production in 2010 per megawatt hour for natural gas is 64 cents, for nuclear is $3.14, and for solar is $776 per megawatt hour. Now, it is, to me, laughable to think that if your input cost is based upon something which has to be subsidized at $776 per megawatt hour, that you can have the same sort of robust expansion of manufacturing in energy-intensive enterprises that we're currently having now. Gentlemen, would you all challenge that? Would you agree with that? What comments would you make?
I would agree with you. Energy, as you know, manufacturers use about 1/3 of the energy produced in this country. In our manufacturing in particular, we use natural gas and electricity to a very large extent because we have to process metal and anneal the metal, and it's critical to our process. We need a comprehensive energy strategy which includes oil, gas, coal, and you can throw in some of the others, solar, wind power. But most of the...
But unless that solar was subsidized, you would not, I presume you would not be able to afford to use it.
We would not be able to afford
So unless the taxpayer is willing to throw his or her money on the table, then frankly, the input costs would be way too high.
The input costs would be way too high. They would, if we had to pay that, we would be less competitive and there would be less jobs.
So we're trying to pick ourselves up by the bootstraps, if you will, taxing ourselves to subsidize it so that you can use it at an affordable cost.
Well, I think that's a bad idea. I think what we need to do is develop what we have. I'd like to see the XL pipeline. That's critical. I'd like to see more development of natural gas through
now let me cut you off just because I'm again about to get the hook. I heard an energy analyst tell me recently that the direct, in fact, maybe the Price Waterhouse or another thing, that that the low cost of natural gas may increase our GDP by 1.1% in 2013, which is really quite remarkable. That's an increase.
Our GDP.
Increase our GDP. You all agree with that?
I would agree with that, absolutely.
So, okay, well, I think we need to go. Thank you all very much. I had more to ask, but we're obviously hurried. Thank you all.
Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. I apologize that our time is so short today. I think we've squeezed a lot of terrific information in between the series of votes, and I would clearly like to thank our distinguished panel. It has been a great discussion about the future of manufacturing in America. Clearly, more and more companies are beginning to rethink their strategies and business plans for the coming years, and I sincerely hope that our subcommittee, working closely together, can give them a reason to make Made in America matter again. I ask unanimous consent to include in the record of the hearing 4 reports published by Mr. Giffey's firm on various aspects of manufacturing to which he had referred to in his testimony. I remind members that they have 10 business days to submit questions for the record, and I ask the witnesses to please respond promptly to any questions they receive. And with that, the hearing is now adjourned. Thank you, gentlemen.
All right, thank you.